Hey everybody, this is Nevin Gusak, your host of the Populist Patriot. With me is a good friend of mine from high school, Rohit Chandra. Rohit is a medical professional. He is also politically engaged. He is a bit of an activist himself and has also a political Zoom group that he started while Donald J. Trump was our president. And this group got together to discuss issues of concern. And I'd like you all to welcome Rohit.
Thank you, Nevin. Very nice to be on.
Yeah, thank you for joining us tonight. This is actually, when we have guests, this is actually called the Populist Roundtable. So you're going to be our third guest. So,
There a King Arthur?
I'm sorry.
Are you the King Arthur of this roundtable?
Well, once we hit 9, then we can talk about roundtables. All righty. So, one of the things I like to do, I mean, those of you who know me and know my co-host Herschel, we love to talk and talk and talk and talk about a lot of these deep philosophical, ideological, and historical issues. But when we have guests, I always like to ask the guests more questions and tend to do little talking because the purpose of guests is to have them share their ideas, his or her ideas. So what I want to do is, first of all, Rohit knew me back when I was a Reaganite. So can you confirm to any doubters or haters about my conservatism back in the day?
Absolutely. So I think Nevin liked the idea of trickle down. I think he believed in what Reagan was selling. There was someone else in his class, and I think he and that person were pretty much aligned. I don't know. Were you a member of the Young Republicans?
I don't think there was a young there wasn't a young Republican club. There was a club of Amnesty International, and I remember when I was head of the when I was involved with Amnesty International, I thought they were very biased in bringing a representative of the African National Congress. And I'm still not a fan of the African National Congress because they were dominated and still are aligned with the South African Communist Party and very strongly anti-American. Of course, you have to understand the backdrop. They were fighting against a racially nationalist authoritarian dictatorship of the Afrikaners. So it's like, pick your poison. But anyway, so as a good conservative, I thought it was unfair that here they're picking on a quote right-wing, a quote unquote allegedly right-wing government. So why don't they focus on also communist dictatorships, which were just as bad, if not even worse, which is what I felt at the time. And I still somewhat feel that today. I would say I'm less sympathetic and less apologetic towards the old Afrikaner Nationalist Party government in South Africa. But so I had Renshin Darlow, who was the Dalai Lama's chief representative for North America, to speak out against the massive abuses of the Chinese Communist Party. And I remember he spoke also in the auditorium, and it was filled by, I think, like the entire upper school. And I was proud of that achievement, to try to balance the scales. But there was I don't think there were any political clubs. There was the FBLA, and he was the head of FBLA.
John was the head of the FBLA.
John, right? Yeah. Nice guy.
Yeah.
I think he's still a Republican.
Future Business Leaders of America. That's what I was thinking of. Okay. That's what it was.
And I was more of a social science kind of guy. I wasn't an entrepreneur. I mean, back then, and I still do have respect for, the productive entrepreneurship and whatnot. And, but yeah, I was not involved in that venue, but I was definitely, John and I and some of the other conservatives, we used to listen to Rush Limbaugh. He sometimes would have me go into the AV room and we would watch Rush Limbaugh together. I don't know if you knew that on the TV.
You've been a staunch anti-communist for as long as I've known you.
Yes, and I still am. But the difference is I understand why average people become communists and believers in other authoritarian collectivist movements. I've spoken with such people. I've dialogued with a communist. I've dialogued with a non-racially oriented neo-fascist who's more of a civic nationalist. And these people got very turned off by conservatives. One of them was actually a politically active conservative. And I realized that people like that, minus the hatred and the violent tendencies, characteristics of those movements, they have legitimate critiques and gripes about the socio-political and economic system. And so I think I've gained a little bit more humility and perspective in trying to be understanding. And I think you can solve problems effectively, social problems, problems of political extremism, when you actually go to the roots of the problem. But anyways, enough about me. But yes, Rohit remembers when I was a conservative, and now he can vouch for me that I was hardcore. So,
They say if you're not a liberal at 20 and a conservative at 40, you're a fool. So I don't know. I mean, you were a conservative in your teens, and now you're a liberal. This is very confusing.
well, I'm not a liberal. I'm a populist and a radical civic nationalist.
Okay,
I mean, there's differences. I mean, I'm really of a hybrid of beliefs. But anyways, let's go into you. So, let's go back to the 1980s and 1990s. And how did you started to get interested in politics? Because, I mean, you run a politically oriented Zoom discussion group. You post a lot of very insightful analysis with articles and papers and studies on your social media. So what got you into that? Let's go all the way back to your formative years.
So, I actually don't think I was that into politics. I was fairly politically disengaged. I mean, I remember going to a Bill Clinton rally in the 90s when I was at Dartmouth College. He was campaigning in New Hampshire. So I went up in 96 and, heard him speak and was mesmerized. My mother liked the Clintons. But really, I'd been pretty politically disengaged, but I really viewed Trump as a clear and present danger immediately after he took office. And I know that you and some others that supported him at that time. But I mean, morally, I was very concerned about the kind of person who was in the office, who was in the White House. My friends and I, several friends of mine and I on Facebook started to occupy Facebook with art to try to disrupt the constant negativity, because it seemed like the country was just sliding into hopelessness. Trump, of course, himself was tweeting every day and, was alarming everyone and was all over the news. And, for some people, this was traumatizing. I mean, he had been, a sexual predator, and some, and that seems to have been proven pretty much. And, those who, had been preyed upon, I think, were really struggling with having a president like this in the White House. Others just, felt that he was a con man. So I was not really into politics until Trump got elected, actually, in 2016. And then I think things started to coalesce. I got very into art as a means of sort of distracting myself and, finding beauty to cope with, what I viewed as just a difficult, just the day-to-day was difficult, I think, under Trump. And then I think when COVID hit, that's when I think I started the Zoom group when COVID hit to see how people were coping. I'm a physician. I'm a psychiatrist at Mass General Hospital, and I'm an instructor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. And I was really interested in how people were coping emotionally, how their lives had changed. So I started a Zoom group with 3 other people in the beginning, and then it kind of mushroomed, and we now have about 10 to 12 that come every week. And I think we were talking about COVID. We started talking about race in America, and then we began to really discuss, last summer, how to support Joe Biden and the Democrats. To be fair, I'm a Bernie Sanders supporter, but I think Bernie absolutely, does what's right for the people, and he has for 35, 40 years. But it seemed obvious that Joe Biden was going to be the nominee, and once he was, Bernie essentially said, stand behind Joe. The most important thing is to defeat Trump. And so this group and I, we read articles. We tried to figure out how much we could galvanize support for Biden, and just tried to stay vigilant and really, get the word out to others that you have to vote. And that was the key thing. So I would say 2017, I began to become politically involved, but then really in 2020 is when I really started to follow politics. And I'm dating someone I have for about 2 years who is very into politics. And I think that was a big influence as well. Very interesting. He thinks politics is life. Politics influences all aspects of your life. And
does she have any friends down in Florida?
She's from Connecticut. I don't know if she has friends down in Florida, but she's quite thoughtful about politics and very intentional about who she supports. Takes it very seriously. Who you put into office absolutely affects your life. Legislation really does affect your day-to-day life. So, but that's I think kind of how I got into politics. But it was much more recent than you'd imagine.
Yeah, no, and a lot of people have different entry points. With me, it was a very gradual process. I mean, I guess for me, I think a lot of the stated conservative goals are good, as I think you would probably agree. Preventing or reducing the abortion rate, reducing crime, encouraging, strengthening the nuclear family, developing entrepreneurship, and strong national security. The problem is that the Reaganite brand of conservatism, neoliberalism, market fundamentalism, and globalism have actually contradicted all of those goals, really prevented those goals from reality, in fact, exacerbating our problems. So, that's what turned me off from mainstream conservatism, or if it's considered far right or whatever, it's really to me all the same, other than the real conservative populism, American conservative, Rod Dreher type conservative. That's a different world that I respect more than Reaganism. But you said a lot of very interesting things, and I wanted to start out, let's talk about Trump. So you mentioned that his character and also the content of his tweets really raised your hackles, you and your friends in your political group that you've developed. What specifically upset you guys about the tweets? Was it more the sort of culture war and the use of this sort of ersatz, racially oriented rhetoric, for the lack of a better terminology, if you will, or was it policy oriented? I mean, which came first? What specifically opened your eyes? Was it the shithole country thing that he allegedly stated, in a closed meeting early in his presidency? Was it the deportations and the detention centers, which his predecessor and now his successor still engages in? And I find it rather tragicomic and amusing in a bad way that all of a sudden Ted Cruz and the Republicans are grousing and complaining about these detention centers under Biden, and we can debate the merits or demerits of this, but the hypocrisy stinks, so I just want to slip that in there. I mean, what was it? It seems like it was more his rhetoric, and you as being, your parents coming from a country abroad. I think that probably resonated with you in a bad way. So I'd like to focus on that first, because you brought up a lot of good things in your discussion there.
So, all of it. I mean, I think all of it was disturbing. It's difficult to parse out one. I'm not a one issue person. I mean, I think I would call myself a humanist. I'm interested in people and people's well-being. I want this country to be prosperous, to be happy. And he was clearly divisive, and he was spreading hate, and it was effective. So, you brought up my parents. My parents are immigrants from India. My dad came in 1968 as a physician, and he finished his training here. My mother came in 1970 after they had an arranged marriage, also from India, also a physician. So, in the 60s, the Hart-Celler Act, I believe, allowed immigration from Asia. It opened up visas from Asia. And this was on the backs of the civil rights movement. And, you're of Jewish background. Jews really, really helped people from other countries come to the U.S. So they facilitated immigration. They had suffered, and they knew the value of diversity, I think. And at the same time, in the 60s, the U.S. was trying to bring in people was trying to bring in scientists to assist with the space race, and bringing in physicians to help with Medicare and Medicaid expansion. So, a lot of people came in from Asia. And then, of course, we know, Latin America, people have come up from Latin America. And the country has become browner over time. Like my parents had kids, and a lot of immigrants had kids, and so the country is demographically changing. And I think these demographic changes, it seemed like it really hit the Republicans in 2008 when Obama got elected. And I don't know what your politics are about Barack Obama, but it seemed like he was elected by a coalition of women and then various minority groups, racial minorities, ethnic minorities, gender minorities, sexual minorities. And this coalition, I think, really concerned conservatives. So reportedly, the Koch brothers and some other rich folks, worked with politicians to say, how can we prevent this from happening again? What is this demographic, and how do we counteract it? So they had a choice. Either they were going to broaden the Republican Party platform to appeal to these people who were sort of, this new powerful coalition, and try to pull them away from the Democrats, or they would pursue the strategy of voter suppression while stirring up their own base, so suppressing the votes of the other side while stirring up their own base. And I think they decided on sort of an 8 to 10 point plan about how to gerrymander and how to suppress votes for the other side, and how to really rile up their own base. And Trump, I think, was, the natural kind of outgrowth of that. When Barack Obama was in office, obviously Trump, started the birther nonsense, and this really worked. The Tea Party and the birthers did a good job of attracting the racists, attracting those who didn't feel like Barack Obama was a legitimate president. And so Trump, I think, really had some appeal there. I'm not sure he actually expected to win in 2016. It seems to me, I do believe that the Russians were very involved. Everyone has different views on this. I do think there were very strong ties to Russia. I think he actually was a Russian agent, and whose goal was to sort of damage America, which he did very effectively, so that Russia would gain some geopolitical dominance, or would gain at the expense of the U.S. And Trump, his motive was basically to get in there and make as much money as possible. I would think so. So that's my belief system on that. And I think his coming into office, he was good at painting himself, and this may have been strategized, but it seems like the Republicans decided that he would be the defender of white Christian male supremacy. He was the defender of the white race against the hordes. And the hordes would be immigrants, the hordes would be Black people, the hordes would be, immigrants from elsewhere, and people coming up from Latin America. So, he pretty much decided he was against the Obama coalition. Whatever Obama stood for, he was against, Republicans were against, and they followed in his footsteps. They just kind of rode his coattails. What his first act was to try to remove sanctions on Russia, which luckily failed. But then after that, the Muslim ban, which was very badly carried out and eventually had to be scrapped, basically a lot of hateful acts, which Stephen Miller was really the architect of. He had gone to college with my brother, and my brother noted that he was just a mean human being who just enjoyed.
Really, that's interesting. That's interesting. So
my brother's graduating class at Duke, and he was just known for cruelty. He was an architect of cruel policies. Mm-hmm. So he was very loyal to Trump, and so Trump went along with what he wanted, and and he supported Trump in whatever way. Trump wanted the wall, great, but the kids in cages. This was very much Stephen Miller. So all of it was concerning. The divisiveness, the demonization or hatred of various groups, saying that certain people were un-American. You're only American if you are of this particular background. Otherwise, you're of questionable loyalty and you have to prove your loyalty. We saw this kind of stuff in Nazi Germany. Not that we were alive, but this happened in Nazi Germany as well. This happened, South Africa, had some pretty bad apartheid. That wasn't political, but So we've seen the othering and the damage that othering can do.
No, it's interesting, and it's an interesting point. I mean, I supported Trump in 2016 chiefly because what I took from his message, and he often did it, was clearly not always the best messenger, and let's just say spread his message in a very ham-fisted and very clumsy way, to put it very mildly, to be politically correct. With Trump, what I liked about Trump in 2016 is he was seemingly very not ideological on policy issues, even as Tom Hartman, the veteran progressive populist radio and TV show commentator, has put it, that Trump ran as basically on a lot of democratic populist FDR as well as economically nationalist policies, which is really what got him 37% of the Union vote and 12% of the Bernie Sanders vote. Right. And I was disaffected with the Republican Party and conservatism. Trump wanted to spend trillions on infrastructure. He didn't want to privatize security and Medicare. He campaigned ostensibly, albeit inconsistently, though, on a civic nationalist platform, which had the impetus particularly of Steve Bannon saving his butt as his campaign was foundering. His positions on Russia and China are interesting in his books, which we all know are ghostwritten, but still reflect his thoughts. He took a very dim view on the threat of Russia as far back as the 1990s, called it the nuclear Walmart for countries like Iran and Iraq. He was concerned about this new Eurasian axis, that China and Russia would be our chief geopolitical allies. But the fact of the matter is, like many other multinational corporate executives and firms, they did business with Russia, and he did business with China, and we can debate the merits or demerits of that, but that is the facts. Trump's predecessors, let's take Obama and Hillary Clinton, they, kowtowed to Putin as well in many ways too. They granted Vladimir Putin's Russia permanent normal trade relations, which was supported by a lot of our Tea Party congressmen, by the way. For the all those people who cling to the Tea Party thinking they hated Obama, they agreed with Obama, when the campaign donors were getting greased, if you will, or benefiting. Signed New START treaty, and Russia and the old Soviet Union were terrible treaty partners. They continue to build their aggressive nuclear weapons arsenal, continue to violate the INF treaty and whatnot. So really, I don't look at Trump as somebody who's uniquely, quote, pro-Russian. He actually had a very inconsistent policy towards the Russians. During his administration, the trade deficit with Russia continued. There were new sets of sanctions that were put in, arguably despite Trump, because of congressional pressure as well as pressure from within his administration. He withdrew from the INF treaty, which was being violated ever since by Mikhail Gorbachev, and wanted to restart American energy production too, as well, at least on paper. I mean, of course, I differ from the standard Republican view on energy, because not only would I want to exploit fossil fuels within a tightly regulated framework, but also I'm open to solar, wind, bioconversion, etc., to have the full medley of energy sources rather than just solely rely on fossil. What turned me off from Trump is that he basically governed as a kleptocratic, plutocratic, oligarchic form of government. And part of the Republican playbook, this is talked about in Kevin Phillips's book, Boiling Point, I think it's Boiling Point, where he talks about and reproduces quotes and memos from folks like Lee Atwater and other top Republican strategists, which points out that we're going to use the culture wars to get the populist Democratic vote in the South, working class votes, right, because we'll never basically appeal to people with trickle-down economics and reactionary anti-unionism and other globalist, anti-worker, anti-nation policies. So that's what Trump utilized. He utilized these culture wars, these
Yep.
dog whistles. Do I think he believed in it? Honestly, no, which makes it even worse, because if you know that you're using incendiary, unpleasant, even racially tinged rhetoric at times, whether behind closed doors or in front in public, and you know that's not you, well, that says a lot about you as a person, and we'll just
Yeah.
leave it at that. That actually is worse than actually believing it, but we'll leave that aside. So with Trump launching a lot of the deregulations on the financial industry, he stacked the National Labor Relations Board with really anti-union, anti-worker representatives. He picked two judicial nominees that were swamp creatures that supported the swamp. And yes, when he mentioned the swamp, he mentioned Wall Street, not owning the libs. Okay, go back to his old tweets and do the
Hmm.
research, folks. Okay, he did not mean the libs. Okay,
Hmm.
he meant Wall Street and major corporations and lobbyists. Okay, hello out there, any conservative doubters? That's what he meant.
Yeah.
And you know,
Politicians say a lot to get into office. They will figure out who people are angry at, and they will criticize those people and say, I'm with you. We will, these are your enemies, and we will make sure to crush them. In some cases, he was very much like you said, working with the enemies. I mean, he and his daughter had deals with China. And it was really problematic. He was demonizing China as a currency manipulator and all this, but he had deals with China. Again, I'm not against China as a government or as a people necessarily, but I just want to point out that he was, speaking out of two sides of his mouth. I mean, he was enjoying financial gain. He and his daughter were, and yet, he, was criticizing China. So.
yeah, I mean, look, I agree with the tariffs that he put into place and whatnot, and I agree with the military buildup, but he also fired Sheh Assad, who was one of the best procurement negotiators of the Pentagon, who really tried his hardest in the past to negotiate prices for weapons down by the military contractors. So again, Trump surrendered to the swamp. With China, with Trump, to quote one think tank, defense-oriented think tank, I think it's called the Center for New American National Security Policy or something or another, that Trump's policy was confrontational without being competitive. And this is where you need to have a top line research, and you need to have a top line education system that invests, particularly free subsidized college for science and educational majors, in medicine, biology, physics and whatnot, giving kids who are especially of limited means free scholarships, if you will, because you got to build up your R&D base to be competitive with other countries. Other advanced industrial powers, as well as our enemies in China and Russia, do that. What are we doing? We just take the Tea Party approach of small government and not invest in it because, God forbid, we raise taxes on the 1%.
Yeah.
Our infrastructure has issues too as well. That's another way of getting competitive, high-speed broadband. Also developing, definancializing our economy, de-Reaganizing and de-Clintonizing our economy, where we would reward, incentivize industrial production in this country.
Right.
Tariffs are a component of it, but it's not the only component. We have to also redo tax policies. We have to also, that have been in place since the 1980s. We have to also forbid stock buybacks, for example, which used to be illegal before 1982, before
That's
St.
exactly the point I wanted to bring up. That's huge. That is absolutely.
Go ahead.
So in the 80s, this stock buyback thing was a real problem because it created a real alliance between the CEO and the board of trustees, stockholders, these people at the top. And so, in the past, companies had been run in a way that, was fair enough to workers. CEOs, were not making astronomically high salaries that were, in the hundredfold what workers were making. But when things change in the 80s, when there's deregulation and this stock buyback thing, now you have scheming, short-term scheming to make as much money and get. So CEOs and stockholders would figure out how to pretty much, just milk the company for whatever it was worth and then get out. They would sell companies for parts. It was just a nasty, nasty game. I mean, the movie Wall Street, describes corporate raiders,
Mm-hmm.
but this was really, against, I guess, what was good for the country.
It
But
was.
figured out how to game the system economically, and the deregulation made it so that the SEC started to get gutted, and pretty much the Republicans' idea of small government is absolutely what happened. With Trump, when Trump took office, Michael Lewis writes in the fifth, it's called the fifth risk, that that Trump pretty much didn't put his own people into a lot of areas of government. He just let those departments go understaffed or unstaffed because he didn't want to pay people to regulate. So basically, my view of what Trump and his group did is they knew that taxes are coming in from the people, and instead of structuring them in the form of services to go give back to the people, said, great. Like Lucille Ball in that famous scene where she's wrapping Hershey's chocolates and they're going too fast for her, she
Yes.
put them in her mouth. These guys were trying to figure out how to put as many chocolates in their mouth as possible and not let too many go past them on the conveyor belt back to the people. So money is coming in, and they're trying to figure out how to give it to themselves and their friends. And now, governments have done this in the past, but Trump did it to the extreme. He filled certain positions with his loyalists, and those loyalists pretty much did what was good for his oligarch friends. And then other positions, which regulatory positions, he left unfilled. So that really America became a free-for-all, and a free-for-all in which the billionaires are pretty much, in charge and are able to do whatever they want to the people, and while eating lots of money. So really problematic, I thought.
Yeah, no, exactly. It really to reindustrialize the United States, and I'm an economic nationalist. I'm not a xenophobe. In my personal life, I certainly don't practice that. You remember me from high school. Certainly never had that attitude. I like foods from foreign countries, even sometimes better than American food, to be honest with you. And and whatever, and just other personal stuff I won't go into, but so you can't call me a xenophobe, but I want, like you, what's best for the United States.
Right.
I am an America First person, but it doesn't come through this sort of gut xenophobia that's just sort of ersatz. It actually doesn't actually strengthen the country as a whole at its roots, at its foundations. I mean, we are a multiracial country. That's not going away. That is a reality. In my personal world, outside of politics and this program, I embrace it. Uh, that's just my opinion. We're a heterogeneous nation by and large. It's just not going away. And my idea is more of a multiracial, economic-based coalition. I tend to look at things through ideology, foreign policy, of course, but also through economics. And it's my belief that we should have a multiracial, multi-class, populist, and nationalist coalition that have America in their hearts, and they actually approach problems with real solutions. I mean, I hate to sound cliched, but actually with a mindset of, okay, what works, what doesn't work, what's going to defend the United States against Russia and China alliance, and what is also going to stem the tide of leftward extremism and neo-Nazi, the growth of neo-Nazi and racial nationalist movements, and the discontent and the anger in this country, and make us also a mentally and physically healthier nation where people can have children again. Part of the reason why people get abortions, when you look at the studies on both sides, is because of economics, because of falling wages. So again, I think the conservative goals are good when it's phrased properly. It's just they're doing an awful job in fulfilling these goals. They're exacerbating the problems. So that's my take. I think we need a multiracial coalition, and in order to reindustrialize the country, to restore production, to compete with enemies like China, and I consider their government an enemy. It's not the people, but the government, like Russia. We need to really restructure our political and economic system at a fundamental level in certain ways, because it's subverted by the oligarchs. And, Trump has put it on steroids. He outsourced a lot of his legislative agenda to Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell and the Republican establishment and the libertarian wing of the party.
Very
He
much so.
basically ignored the populists. He ignored the very people that brought him to the dance, because he couldn't just win on the Republican vote alone.
He scorned.
Had,
I mean, he knew he'd manipulated them. He scorned them. Steve Bannon milked them with the build a wall. I mean, they exploited them at every turn. They took money from them after the election. The election was stolen. They just kept taking money. So they played so much of their following. It's just frustrating.
So even though I agree with 25% of what Trump has done, the other 75% was so horrendous. Yeah. I just could not forgive him. He had an opportunity, if he wanted to become the next, in my mind, the next FDR or Teddy Roosevelt, if he wanted to. He really was at a cusp. After 40 years of neoliberalism and globalism, he had a chance to really remake the Republican Party and conservatism, or at least try. But instead, he basically doubled down on Reaganism and really played upon the worst impulses of his base. And I'm not saying everybody who supported him was racist or bad people or anything like that. There are quite a few that I've met that were not racist. And there are others that, clearly you can tell, even if they deny being racism, they still use some of the rhetoric. I've seen it on social media and whatnot. So I could not forgive Trump for that, and I'm basically done with the Republican Party. I was a critical supporter of Bernie Sanders. I like the Bernie Sanders after 1990 better than the Bernie Sanders before 1990, when he was clearly radical left. And, now he's really just a social democrat. He's not a real socialist. I mean, his tax plan against the billionaires wouldn't make them not billionaires. Which is fine by me personally.
We had a 90%, I forget exactly what it is, but in the 50s, I mean, 90% of income above a certain level was taxed, above a certain level, 90% of your income was taken. I forget what the term is for that. But, that capped people's incomes to a degree and enabled and made sure that certain people weren't hoarding all of the country's wealth. Right now, you have people hoarding the country's wealth, sending it to offshore accounts, refusing to pay taxes on it, and it's like bleeding the country of. It's like bloodletting. I mean, there's not enough blood in the system to go around, and then this last administration was doing giveaways to their friends, like a $500 billion slush fund that Steve Mnuchin was overseeing. Where's this money going? But it's probably going to their buddies. And then you have austerity when it comes to providing services back to people and taking care of basic things like infrastructure. I'm sorry, we don't have the money for that. Yes, because you just gave it all away to your friends.
So, unaccountable. The PPP loans for the longest time were unaccountable. They refused to release who they gave it to and everything else. I mean, I thought it was supposed to drain the swamp. What's happened? Come on.
Trump became the big swamp monster, and now he's gone to Florida. Seems appropriate.
Yeah, well, at least he doesn't live in the same county as I do, so I can...
You're in Broward?
Yes, I'm in Broward, just south of Palm Beach. So anyways, but getting back to you, so we talked about, what upset you and your circle of political friends, personal friends, about Trump's tweets and whatnot, the rhetoric he used more on the cultural side and racial side. But you describe yourself as being a populist, and you are very concerned about the plight of the working class, the poor, the middle class. You've mentioned that in some recent conversations with me. You mentioned that you were a supporter of Bernie Sanders. So what opened your eyes? See, this is what kind of titillates my political taste buds here, is your concern about the poor, the working class. This is why we have this show, Herschel and I, because we're deeply concerned about the small businessman, the nationally based manufacturer, the professionals, the middle class, the working class, the poor, the underclass. What opened your eyes with that?
And I'll say this. I don't really I don't subscribe to any ideology. I don't think I go from theory outwards. As a doctor, I see patients, I get a sense of what's happening in their lives, and then gain a sense of what's going on in the country. My favorite personage of all time is Abraham Lincoln. And President Lincoln used to take public opinion baths. And there's a funny way of saying he used to allow people from all over the country to just come to the White House and tell him their problems. And when that happened, he gained a sense of what some of the critical issues were on the ground. So I think where I'm coming from is that on the ground, I work with a pretty impoverished population. I work in Chelsea, Massachusetts, which is the 5th poorest city in Massachusetts out of 351. It's about 2/3 Latino. And I mean, I saw people who were working their tail off, 2 jobs, 60 hours a week, maybe 80 hours a week, and still not bringing in enough money. And that strikes me as decidedly unfair. It's said in the press that the rich have worked hard. I would submit to you that the working poor work very, very hard. So, the propaganda that has been, kind of the thinking that's been put into our heads it's been very intentional. Right-wing think tanks have convinced us that, the CEOs are job creators, that unions are greedy, and it's nonsense. It's just not, the poor are looking for handouts. I know lots of poor people who work very, very hard and just cannot make ends meet because the cost of living has skyrocketed. Wealthy people can buy up properties and, raise rents and kind of do what they want. So it's unfortunately gotten to a point where there's they're predators and there's prey, and there's lots and lots of prey. And it's unfortunate that America has gotten like this. I mean, wage theft since probably 1980 has become really significant. I mean, it's a funny term, but those who have the power have said, we will take the money in and we will not give you very much in terms of businesses, in terms of big business. Again, small businesses, CEOs are usually pretty reasonable and things like that. Small businesses are the lifeblood of America. But with big business, where you have lots and lots of employees, you're disconnected from them. Companies are often trying to cut, they're trying to cut the fat, which ultimately means you pay fewer people to do more work and you eat more of the money yourself, and you justify it through, the media putting out articles that are favorable to you and negative to labor. And so, there's been union busting and deregulation. And so now these oligarchs do exactly what they want. The corruption is horrible. What we call lobbying is a funky way of just saying corruption. You cannot get in to see senators and congressmen these days unless you have a political action committee that has paid them. Unless you go through, unless you have a lobbyist. So regular people are not able to influence they're not able to influence politicians effectively. So the levers of political change, people are pushing them, but they're not connected anymore to to Washington. Washington is run by lobbyists, special interests, and This is a real problem. And if you have the rich, individual rich and rich companies basically paying lobbyists or paying politicians, fundamentally, then the politicians are going to do what those companies want. And they are not listening to the people anymore. They listen to people right before elections. They tell the people what they want to hear. They get elected, and then they generally do what big companies want. I think the Biden administration has been pretty responsible. The Biden administration looks like it was really put in power by Black people. The Black vote made a huge difference. James Clyburn, I think, made a big difference in South Carolina in that primary. And I think a deal was made that Biden was going to be responsive to the needs of Black people and would put Black people in his cabinet. And so I think Biden actually has done what America has needed. Biden has been responsive to America's actual needs and has kept his mouth shut for the most part and just done what's needed. I mean, I've been very impressed so far.
Yeah, I mean, my take is that both sides. You have politicians, especially a lot of Republicans, and also a fair number of Democrats. I mean, you get people like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, for example. They are clearly on the side of the big corporations. There's no question about it, whether because of ideology, campaign contributions. We all know that congressmen and senators have to go to special office in Washington, D.C., near the Capitol, and do what is called call time, of which up to 40% of their time is spent on that. That clearly shows a broken system. I was not a supporter of Biden during the Democratic primary of 2020. Biden, in my opinion, just had a horrible anti-populist, anti-nationalist voting record from when you take a look at his repeal of Glass-Steagall, the Bankruptcy Act that was unfavorable to consumers in 2005, when you look at his support for NAFTA, permanent normal trade relations with the Chinese, his during the 1980s was very favorable towards degrading our defense position vis-a-vis the Soviets. So there were a lot of areas of concerns with Biden that I just thought he was really one of him, along with maybe Michael Bloomberg. Well, I would say Bloomberg was even worse. Michael Bloomberg was much worse than even Biden, if you believe it.
Right.
But Biden, was a terrible candidate. Bernie, I think, kind of since 1990, rhetorically and on some of his voting record, moved to the right, which made him more palatable since the 1980s, when he was very far left. He was open to nationalizing certain industries and stuff like that. And by the way, I'm open to nationalizing certain things too, by the way, but for differing reasons.
Right.
And Bernie was coming more from a quasi-Marxist ideology. I'm looking at it as more because the private sector has clearly failed in certain areas and needs to take a back seat. But anyways, Biden.
I raise one point that you mentioned.
Sure. Go ahead.
I think Republicans' end game is to privatize as much as possible. I think they want to give as much of the country over to oligarchs in the way that Russia has. When I was in Texas maybe 10 years ago, I noticed that there was a road that had been privatized. You had to pay toll on this road. It was privately owned, and you had to pay toll. I was like, that's pretty strange. Texas also privatized, their grid. I mean, the electrical fiasco that just happened was because Texas privatized. And so if you don't have regulation, then people can make lots of money, but then you can also just totally drop the ball for huge sections of the population. If roads are privatized, someone's like, well, I'm owning this road. I don't want to put in the money for repairs. And now a truck, goes through it falls into a ditch. I mean, so privatization is problematic because, companies don't typically want to regulate themselves, and they don't want to think long term, and they don't want to put money into infrastructure. So, those who are interested in the public good need to be in charge of some major industries. I mean, there was an example in Tennessee of a fire department that was a private fire department. So so a fire was raging, and they got to this house, and they looked up the owners, and they said, "Oh, these people have not contributed to the fire department," and they let the fire rage. And that seems awful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so if every street were private, if your library was private, if your school was private, if you had to get nickel and dime for everything, what are you paying taxes for? And this is the fundamental issue, that if you're going to have small government, don't make me pay taxes then. I mean, if you're not going to do much for me, if you're trying to privatize everything, well then I'm not paying taxes for any good reason.
The reason for existence for most of the Republican Party on the national level, there are a few exceptions that have existed, like for the late Congressman Walter Jones of North Carolina, who is terrific. But other than that, most of the national party, and a lot in state legislatures too, their reason of existence is to protect the economic interests and the power, the aggregated power of private sector oligarchs. And a large part of the Democratic Party, whether Bill Clinton and people like Larry Summers and Bob Rubin and others, and this happened a lot under Obama. I'm a critic
of neoliberals. Obama put Wall Street in the country.
And I voted for Obama in 2008, thinking he'd be another FDR. And
Right.
really and truly, I didn't expect much from Biden. I think Biden has done some good things in regards to getting rid of some of the Trump appointees in the National Labor Relations Board. But there are other things where I think Biden is kind of acting like Bill Clinton and Obama, because that's the political tradition he arcs from. I don't think Biden is a communist, for example, as those say. He's clearly not. He's a corporate-friendly Democrat. Um, and there are things I wish that he took more of an FDR bully pulpit stance, for example, like with the Amazon strike, as well as taking a firmer stand regarding uh, the $15 minimum wage, and really using his political capital to push through, the what is that bill in the House that's favorable for union organizing. I would like, even if he failed politically, if he took more of a bully pulpit stance like Abraham Lincoln did with issues, or Teddy Roosevelt, or FDR, at least in economic issues. I
Lincoln was not
think
an ideologue. Lincoln wanted to keep the Union together, and then as the war went on, he decided that slavery was really problematic, and then he freed the slaves in the South, partially for morale. And then he came to understand that Black people really had fought quite hard for this country, and that they should be given the right to vote. And that
And he
probably
was
got
very public about the things like that. And Lincoln was public about protection, the need for
right.
protectionist economic policies and things of that nature. I mean, these people were really bold and very outspoken, and in a good way, largely. So, and this show takes a position: we're not partisan, we're not aligned with any political party, we're critics of all political parties. Uh, you know, my co-host and we've changed our views on things. I mean, I've certainly have radicalized compared to where I was when I first started out with an interest in politics. So, what did you like about Bernie then? So you saw people like me. I work in the library. I've worked in 2 inner city libraries managing. A lot of these people are very good people,
Yeah.
largely people of color, African
Sure.
American, and immigrant populations. I, full disclosure, I've dated 2 women from foreign countries originally who've settled here in the United States. And it's been a very eye-opening
Yeah.
experience for me,
Exactly.
because when you don't have enough resources or any resources, no matter how hard you work, it's not easy to get ahead.
Exactly.
You have a lot of people that do want to get jobs. They just either don't have the education to compete in today's job market, or um, they don't have the networking, they don't have the computer skills. And I think society needs to respond to these people. So as long as they're willing to work hard and invest
Yeah.
their time in bettering themselves, I think society, from a nationalist point of view, society has a responsibility to assist them in integrating into the larger
Yeah.
American national community. Does
Right.
that make sense, what I'm saying?
I mean, what I'm frustrated. I'm a child psychiatrist, so I mean, I look at development, and the crushing of human potential is really what I hate. I mean, I hate the fact that there's so little social mobility now. People
Mm-hmm.
who are talented, it's very hard to go to college, because if you don't have money, then you have to take out huge amounts of loans, and you're just saddled under all these loans. And if you do graduate from college, what kind of jobs are available to you? Are they ones that can help you pay back your loans and
Mm-hmm.
thrive in society? I mean, it's very frustrating, to see human potential wasted like this. Unfortunately, the rich are finding a way to keep themselves and their kids at the top, and everyone else is fighting to try to get up there. But it's a difficult battle. So it feels sad to know that a lot of Americans just cannot reach their potential, cannot do what they're capable of, because the system is somewhat stacked against them. Um, so that feels kind of saddening. Yeah.
But how do you keep yourself moving forward, though, personally, knowing we've
Mhm.
both done the research, we've both seen a lot,
Yeah.
in our respective careers. What keeps you moving forward in life?
I mean, ultimately, I mean, as a physician, you help the people who need your help, and it's a gratifying thing. I mean, you know, you didn't cause the problems. I didn't cause the problems. You didn't cause the problems. They're out there. I mean, these are societal problems. You know, it takes a lot to change them. So one can be aware, but one can also recognize, you know, I mean, I don't have that much power to change the direction the country is going in. I can lament it, I can discuss it, but I can't do a whole lot individually to create change. What I can do is tend to my little plot of land, as to sort of reference Ralph Waldo Emerson in his essay Self-Reliance. I mean, I can deal with what I have in front of me, and that is my patients, that is the family that I love, the friends that I have, my own interest. So, I mean, I don't let this crush me. I mean, it's frustrating to see these tendencies. I mean, I think America has declined since the 1950s, and especially since the 1980s. And I absolutely think Reaganomics was problematic, and it just, the deregulation there and, you know, trickle down, you know, the promise of trickle down, you know, obviously has been, you know, it's been a bust. And it's been a lie. So that, you know, that propaganda, I think, has been terrible. But I mean, I wish that America would resume regulating appropriately for the public good, and you know, that people could be paid properly and have, you know, the chance to live a good life in exchange for their hard work. And yeah, you know, I think the Sanders appeal, I think you sort of asked about Sanders. The Sanders appeal for me is that he wants a good life for most Americans. I mean, I think he looks at the European countries, Northern European countries, and I understand that they're homogenous, that there's some differences. America is not homogenous. They're more homogenous, but they have figured out a way to create a high standard of living for all of their people. I mean, there are basic services that are provided, and yeah, they're taxed at a higher rate, but they get a lot in return. And these are happy societies. Denmark, Sweden, I mean, these are happy societies.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes down to that we should be good to people. Right now, money and property seem to matter more than people. And that is, that's very concerning to me.
Well, it's very concerning too, because when, you know, property is an important right, including a human right, but we've made what Nancy McLean, the historian, has referred to as property supremacy the be end and all of the governance in America from both a lot of the corporate Democrats as well as a lot of the Republicans, which unfortunately are corporate controlled. Mm-hmm. And you have the large property holders in charge. We've had some terrible, terrible decisions made on the national economic front, for example, national security front, for example, open trade relations with Red China and KGB ruled Russia. It was the big property holders that really pushed for that. The big corporate interests. I've written papers and books on this and have documented it endlessly. I'm a lifelong anti-communist. And it's one of the things that turned me against uncontrolled corporate capitalism is the fact that they were, paraphrasing Lenin, they were selling the rope to hang the free society in the West, including the United States. And just, you know, their decisions, employment decisions, which have hurt the poor and working class, that have made socialism and other extremist ideologies more tantalizing for the disenchanted Americans, the cutbacks in schools. Down here in Florida, you had our teabagger governor and teabagger legislature. I'm going to use the term. I don't give a shit. You know, they put in cuts for the state education system, for the state universities and whatnot, which means more loans for kids. And it's not just, I'm sorry, I'm sick and tired of these conservatives or conservatives that say that, oh, it's just for basket weaving or women's studies. No, these are people graduating with law degrees, with history and political science to go into law school, medicine, hard sciences, to become teachers. Cosmetology and even trade school degrees are not cheap. I know that for a fact.
Yeah.
An ex-girlfriend of mine was studying for that.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So, you know, these conservatives who want to conserve nothing but the rights and privileges of private sector oligarchs. That's the only thing they want to conserve. I mean, let's just let the cat out of the bag already.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So the big
They're doing
property
the bidding.
owners, the big corporate executives,
Yeah.
you know, and the Wall Street people, you know, the big property owners, they're the ones that have steered this ship in the wrong direction. That's the issue. This is where I disagree with some of my anti-communist analyst friends and colleagues. They think that the left is steering the ship. The left is not steering the ship with governance. So this is a famous study from Princeton, two professors at Princeton University, Benjamin Page and Martin Gillens from 2014, Northwestern University and Princeton University. It said they'd studied congressional votes and legislation, overwhelmingly supported the 1%. That the people, like, as you pointed out, we have, you know, our desires from our political class are never heard, really, to speak
Business
of.
is wagging the dog. Have you heard of ALEC? I forget exactly.
Yes, sports. I've written about them too.
American Legislative Executive Council, whatever it is. But they just write the bills, and then Congress rubber stamps them. Often, while we are paying attention to some tragedy, they at midnight, you know, just pass some bill that is inimical to the public. It's horrific.
Oh yeah, ALEC. There are some conservatives that know their game actually too, as well, that are against ALEC. There are conservatives, the very far right conservative. John Birch Society has written articles very critical of ALEC because they want a constitutional convention, and they also do not like the fact that ALEC has supported globalist corporate trade deals like the TPP. I've written very critical of ALEC because they're one of the worst examples of conservative hypocrisy. Yeah. They'll have victims of communism weak commemorations, but yet at the same breath they'll be for normalized trade relations with the slave communist regimes in Cuba and Venezuela and China. They were for Obama's PNTR with KGB thug-ruled Russia. It's a lot of crap, ALEC. They're the worst. I actually have a photograph. It's now taken down from the ALEC website. I think I still have it, but they had ALEC officials clinking glasses with Red Chinese Commerce Ministry officials. It's you can't make this. You can't make this stuff up.
This is fascism. That's fascism. Where government and business are intertwined like this. It's fascism. This is this has been fascism, unfortunately.
This is, well, as the, what's his name? Oh, gosh, he was on MSNBC. He was one of the few good ones there. Dylan Ratigan called it corporate communism. This is what it is. It's corporate communism. That's really what it is. I mean, fascism technically is where the state commands business and commands labor, but I mean, the corporate executives, even though fascism and Nazism were anti-capitalist and had revolutionary impulses and wanted to conquer the world and were dictatorships, the big corporations still did business with them in the United States. Sure. Even during World War II through...
Bush, George H.W. Bush's father, Trading with the Enemy Act, right? He and the Bank of New York funded Hitler.
Exactly. So this is why I've come to the conclusion, and we're going to go to the last part of the interview. One of the things I like to examine, it's a good brain game for me, is solutions to fix the problem. This is why I've said on countless shows that we do need a reworking of the system down to the constitutional level, where there needs to be rights and duties stipulated for the economic elites. We need to word that in the name of national security and domestic tranquility and a shared but earned prosperity, as I put it, for the American public. It's the only way America can become a strong, free, and unified country that can survive in perpetuity. And this is why the government, the central state at times, has to be the boss of capital. You can't have a situation where capital is commanding the state, which is what we have now. What are your solutions with everything that you've studied, that you've seen with your own eyes in the medical profession? What are your solutions to that will make us a better country?
Well, one, I think we were perilously close to losing our democracy on January 6th. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, are very far away from having a reasonable and humane society again. I mean, the pendulum has swung very far to the right. Literally, I mean, if Nancy Pelosi were killed on January 6th, Mike Pence were hung, if Trump found a way to keep office, we would have some combination of a dictatorship and oligarchy. I mean, pretty much it would be Soviet Russia in terms of the leadership, in terms of the leaders, Trump and the Republican senators, basically them and the oligarchs being in charge entirely. Democracy really would have been wiped out, I would say. So we are really in a place where we escaped the gallows, the political gallows as a country, in the way that Mike Pence escaped the gallows that day. But so there's a lot of work to do. And I'm not sure how to get to this place, but I think the place that I would like us to be is a place where the democratic levers work again, when people call their congressmen, call their senators, that those people are responsive to them, say, okay, these are your needs. Here's what's happening in the community. And we see this on the local level. Generally, there isn't that kind of corruption on the local level, as far as I can tell. So, if you're talking to your local officials, you're like, here are the problems. They're like, okay, all right, we'll put this, we'll put this up for a vote. Once problems are identified, that they get fixed. And that the needs of the people are prioritized over the needs of corporations. So, I mean, that's a place I'd like to get to. I think I'm describing utopia at this point. This seems laughable compared to where we're at. But I would like the pendulum to at least swing back to the middle. Don't swing to the middle. I would like us to increase the minimum wage. I would like us to pay workers what they deserve to be paid in exchange for, a full day's work. I would like housing prices to come down. I would like college education to become affordable again. I mean, these are the marks of a civilized society. And this is what regular people are able to afford. And the standard of living is now such that so many people are in poverty, and those who are not are, mortgaged to the hilt. And the middle class got gutted, I think, in 2008, 2009. The subprime, mortgage fiasco, what Wall Street did. Wall Street ate the money of a lot of people, and then ate taxpayers' money as it, claimed that it was too big to fail, and the economy would collapse. Now, again, Wall Street is not the economy. I mean, the stocks and options and all these, that's not the economy, unless you're super rich, in which case that's your economy. But the economy. So they frightened everyone, and frankly, I think Obama gave the Wall Streeters a free hand, and they said, great, let's give taxpayer money to each other. So we took the houses of all these people, bankrupted them, and now we get more money, and they pay themselves bonuses. So I mean, that was just a disaster. So we have impoverished the middle class. We've certainly impoverished the poor. There's a giant gap between rich and poor. Economic inequality is very high, and it's getting worse. And these are the sort of indicators of a society that is like on the verge of collapse. I mean, the more economic inequality, the more you get closer to like French Revolution situation. But then you obviously have paramilitarized forces that are, roaming certain areas, and, it's hard to protest effectively. Some people in France were like, why aren't Americans in the streets protesting what's going on economically in their country? It's like, well, we can't afford to leave our jobs. We might get fired. If we lose our jobs, we'll lose our health insurance, and then we might go medically bankrupt, which is not a problem that any other country in the world has. Our healthcare system, I'm a part of it, but it's a mess. It's very privatized. Incentives go to hospitals for illness care, and incentives go to, and health insurance companies are making tons of money. So, we're not thinking about the wellness of people. We're not thinking about what's good for the citizenry from the top down. We are thinking about what's good for the corporations and the rich. And this has been going on for so many years, to the point where I don't know how you turn it back. I know what I would like to see, but I'm not sure. I mean,
Well, I think one of the first steps that we can do is continue to have podcasts and
Right.
continue to provide alternative points of view, which you and I, Herschel, and our other guests have done. I think it's important, as I encourage the audience, and even you, Rohit, if you choose, to share your podcast with like-minded, share this interview with like-minded friends and family,
Okay.
maybe even a few high school people who are friendly to our ideas, who will be like, holy moly, is that Nevin? Did like the ghost of FDR kidnap his prior soul or something?
So you
You
don't
know,
want you want people that might be a little bit sympathetic to our ideas. Okay.
yes, yes, of course. Yeah, sympathetic or at least open to our ideas. And then there are others where it's not going to be well
Hmm.
received, let's put it that way, where it's
I will
like,
not send this to them. Okay, got it. Okay,
yeah.
fine.
Yeah, just like, anyway, share this podcast with people who are politically informed or maybe
Sure.
sympathetic to, to our ideas, or even apolitical people, but have very good inclinations on the issues of the day and what's right and what's not. So
Yeah.
that's one way of doing that. The more people that are educated, the more people can come together and commune online or even in person. We got to get things started. And, look, I live my life daily, positive by and large. I do
Hmm?
my other activities and listening to music, watching movies, fitness, lifting weights, and, dining and all
We got
the.
steps there, Gusak. Pretty impressive.
Yeah, 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 yeah. You want me to show the audiences? No
Go
need.
for it. Go for it. Yeah.
See?
I mean, I
See?
was a scrawny. Oh my God. I mean, I was a scrawny wimp in high school, and I think you were probably close to that. Now I'm still a scrawny wimp, and you
I
look
was a
like
scrawny
you.
wimp. I
Yeah.
was a scrawny wimp. I
But now
was.
you are like, don't mess with Nevin. All right. Very good.
No, no, no. I'm not farming out any bodyguard services, but I'll be ready for the civic nationalists and populist revolutions.
So I can't hire you to knock off some kneecaps, like Jeff Gillooly going after Tanya Harding. No. Okay.
Well, we could talk about that off air.
No.
But no, look, you got to share this podcast. If you're so inclined, to the audience, to you, Rohit. Um, and open people's eyes. But yeah, look, we have to first have an educated population. Once people are educated, and I think a lot of people know what's wrong in American society today. The trick is there's going to be something, some event that will serve as a catalyst. This is what I argue, that will have people slowly but surely in the streets. Or, as I've said in previous podcasts, it's going to take a nationwide collapse of military defeat and economic disaster. I don't want that to happen, but I think that's going to galvanize people to action. And whatever the case is I hope that this podcast, as well as other podcasts out there, are really getting people to think. This is the preparatory stage. I like to look at myself as a foot soldier in this preparatory phase, however small, maybe the size of a toy soldier, but nevertheless something.
And I would say one thing that makes it difficult for change to occur is that emotion is more powerful than reason. We're pretty reasonable people, but unfortunately, I think the stirring up of emotions by demagogues has been very effective in
Mm-hmm,
compromising the ability of people to think. And
mm-hmm,
if they were able to see clearly, they would recognize, that Trump and the Republicans are not for them, that they are being used, that this is effective class warfare, that, the rich are pitting people of various groups against each other to keep their power and to augment their own power. Um, so there's a cartoon where like an oligarch has all these cookies on his plate, and
mm-hmm,
there's like a black man, a white man, or something. There's one cookie left, and he says to the white man, "That foreigner is taking your cookie."
mm-hmm.
This sort of mindset that really, and poor white people. I know J.D. Vance wrote Hillbilly Elegy, which I find to be a laughable, tome that he worked with Peter Thiel in Silicon Valley, a billionaire. And Vance sells the bootstrap theory very effectively, saying, I
Mm-hmm.
did it. I went to Yale Law, and now I'm doing great. Yeah, well, but that it's not easy for everyone to do that, and it's harder in today's society. So cherry picking.
Well, because we're fundamentally unequal in that respect. We're unequal in ability. Some people have strengths, other people do not have strength, and it takes a certain personality to rise up to the top. And I applaud that if it's done honestly. But that's a poor substitute for general policy. That is, frankly, I'm sorry, but that is a freaking cop-out. This whole bootstrap, if you could do it, I could do it. Let's call it what it is. It's a cop-out. Sorry for the thing. I get very annoyed by that.
It's very annoying. Yeah. Anyway, I'm not sure where I'm going exactly, but class warfare is a major problem. And it's been going on for hundreds of years. The rich find a way to keep their power by pitting people against each other. Poor whites often think of themselves as temporarily embarrassed millionaires.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're struggling, but we can be like Trump eventually.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not easy. It's just not easy. And they often will think, there are the people in my way are people of color. That, people of color are taking my job. People of color are the ones that I should be angry at because that should be my position. And that's, what they're fed. And it's,
well, and they're misled by propaganda, as you said.
Exactly.
Propaganda exists from, yes, the organized communist groups and their foreign allies, but also propaganda is organized by the corporate-friendly think tanks and fake grassroots organizations and whatnot, like the Koch network and the other corporate-funded, think tanks and fake grassroots organizations. They use propaganda too as well. And look, the bottom line is that, you have to look behind the curtain and see actually who gave the person of color the job and why they did that. It's not the powerless person's fault.
Yes,
see, this is another issue I have with conservatism.
Yep.
They scapegoat people that don't have power, even collectively. But yet they don't touch the powerful. That's
right.
The 999 reason why I left conservatism. It just did not resonate well with me personally. It conflicted with my sense of values. And I just couldn't reconcile myself with that. And that's a very important thing. Don't get angry at the Indian IT programmer that's brought in here on the H-1B visa. They're just trying to feed their family.
Right.
Okay? I don't get angry at them. Get angry at the company, the corporate executives, or whatever skin color they are, who wanted to boost stock prices or through just sheer greed and materialism, whatever the reason, to lay off American workers of whatever race because they're paid more and to hire underpaid people from abroad. It's the fault of the corporate capitalist. It's what it is.
Yeah, globalism has led to this kind of situation where Americans can't get jobs easily. But on the other hand, the corporations are the ones that are making the decisions, and yet they are, like you said, scapegoating, various groups of people. And cancel culture is a frustrating term. I think accountability culture is fair. The society is becoming more diverse. As it becomes more diverse, people of color, people of various minority groups get more power. And that's, some people don't like that. And they say, my group has been in power and it should be in power. This is my country, not your country. You're a guest. You're a hyphenated American. You don't belong here. You're just a guest here. And that's unfortunate. And the other quick point I want to make was status anxiety. So, middle class, upper middle class, white people often are struggling with the fact that, people of color moving into their town are starting to occupy their companies, or starting to come into their companies, and they are saying, we're going to lose our power. And that's also problematic. So they're saying, we're taking a stand against this. It's sort of a moral crusade against where America is heading. So that's challenging.
And to be honest, in closing, on this show, we don't even like to really talk about the culture war issues from the right or the left, because in reality, it's a distraction. In reality, I don't care what color you are.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's irrelevant. I mean, you're an ally. Forget you're a personal friend of mine. I
Yeah.
mean, you're an ally in the struggle.
Yeah,
Even if we don't agree on everything, there are certain
Right.
core things you and I agree with.
Right.
And when you're building a political movement, you have to look at somebody's skill set. You have to look at their values, what they can bring to the table. Who cares about the color?
Yeah.
You're better at things than I am, for example. And that's how you have to look at it. You have to look at it truly merit based when building a political coalition. And again, we're a multiracial country.
Yeah.
The
And there's
attacks the attacks
transgender,
by Russia,
scapegoating of
China.
women, there's scapegoating of lots of groups, of gay men, of lesbians, of people of different religions, people, it's not obviously not just race, but there's scapegoating of people of all sorts of difference, who are different. There's scapegoating of difference.
Yeah, and the thing of it is that, what we focus on this show is not only national security issues, of course, but also economic issues, because that's what really unites a lot of people across class lines, racial lines, even religious lines. Working Americans of all classes, from the honest business owner downwards, who are being oppressed by corporate capitalism and reactionary politics in this country on a national security level, facing global threats from Russia and China and their domestic as well as their foreign allies in the world. And that's the position that this show takes. And we have to be unified as a people. And yes, that's a pipe dream, granted, but it's needed for this country to survive. And I think that's what you and I, even though we have a lot of similarities and I think some differences, but I think at the end of the day, that's what you and I want for the future of this country. So oh my God, it's almost an hour and 20. We've had a very interesting in-depth discussion. Would love for you to come back again if you'd like to comment on current events. I wanted to thank you for appearing on our show. Definitely an interesting story, some interesting perspectives. And any closing words you have for us?
No, it's a pleasure to see you. I literally have not, I've spoken to you a few times over the phone, but I have not seen you since 1993. I think when you graduated from high school, I'm a year junior to you. Maybe I saw you at Fall Fairs a couple of years after, I'm not sure, but it's been at least 25 years. So a pleasure. It sounds like you have changed based on what you have seen, and you're an honest man. I mean, you really do examine your positions and compare them to what they should be. And if you're finding that people that you are believing in are lying, you say that's a lie. I don't believe in this anymore. And you've changed, and that's a credit to your intellectual honesty and your basic fairness. So,
and credit to you too as well for looking at things honestly too, as well as you see them, and really reacting to your environment, to really people's pain and suffering. And part of my journey was affected by that too, by what I've seen with good people.
Yeah.
And it just strikes, like you, it struck me at my moral core.
Correct.
Right. And I look at life and I say I could be in those persons' shoes, and I am darn lucky for the resources and support networks that I have. And sometimes when I lament the things that I don't have, and I look at people who are really suffering and really trying, it humbles you, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
So anyways, it's been an absolute pleasure. We'll have to continue our offline talks and discussions too as well. I'm going to be off to doing my one of my other passions, which is long walks and fitness. Got to stay in shape. And hopefully we'll have another show next weekend.
Great.
And I want to thank you again, Rohit, for appearing, and we will see you soon.
All right. Have a great night.
Yeah, you too. Take care.